In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. Chris, we've had a few Grizzlies games since we last podcasted. We had a game last night. You are back in Memphis. We are reunited, and you covered the game for us last night while I worked on other stuff. But I was there, and I checked out most of the action. It was a big Luke Kennard game. You had Gigi Jackson playing in his second game for the Grizzlies this season. And then all of the stars played pretty well. Ja with, more than 10 assists. Jaren and Dez doing what Jaren and Dez do. Just your thoughts on the most recent win and, what it looked like. Because I know Taylor Jenkins had some interesting comments after the game.
Yeah, there was sort of a disconnect between how fun the game was until midway through the third quarter. And it's still a double-digit win in which they were never in danger of losing that game. They had a 17-point lead with like 4 minutes to go or whatever. It ends up being 12. They sort of sputtered to the finish line, but they had a 35-point lead in the third quarter by that point. So to me, that was just a really fun game for fans to see, especially if you're in the building. For Taylor Jenkins and the team, it was a little bit of disappointment that they couldn't maintain their flow and their momentum, and they sort of let the Hornets chip away a little bit too much down the stretch. And so they were very Taylor Jenkins' quote was the first half is what we want to be, and the second half, wasn't basically. I thought Desmond Bane spoke to it pretty well, where he said, in the past we would have been walking around out here, smiling out of here, but we know we can be a great team, and we have to be businesslike about it. It was still like a hugely entertaining game. When you have a Wednesday night game against the Hornets coming in, your worry is that it's just a nothing game. That's like, it's just another night on the schedule and it's not that much fun. Or your greater worry is that you don't sputter down the stretch. You're flat from the jump, right? You take the team lightly and then you sort of underperform. And no, they were crisp to start that game. They just ran them off the floor, built a 35-point lead, highlights popping off everywhere. And then, you couldn't maintain that, but that's fine. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I thought it was an entertaining game as well. And Luke Kennard obviously became quite the story from that game. He had a dunk. Luke Kennard can dunk. It is possible for Luke Kennard to dunk.
He turned and looked at the Grizzlies bench and gave his teammates a, "Did you see that?" before his feet ever hit the floor on that dunk.
He also hit 6 threes in the first half. And he, had a chance to break the Grizzlies franchise record for 3-pointers in a game held by Luke Kennard as well. So he was red hot to start. I almost had it circled, and I said it as the game was beginning. This is a Luke Kennard game because, as I mentioned to you, the Hornets just don't put a lot of good players on the floor.
Right.
And they also don't put a lot of guys that are interested in playing defense on the floor. And it felt like a night where Luke might get some open shots. And if he made the first few, he could, pop off a little bit. And that's exactly what he did. But no one saw the dunk coming. He said he's submitting it to the league for his rookie of the year.
It was a
dunk contest.
It was a steal. So a breakaway off a steal. So he's got the open floor there. And I think everyone was probably wondering in that moment, is he going to try to dunk this? He was probably himself, talking to himself. Am I going to try to dunk this? And sure enough, he is a 6'4" professional basketball player. You would assume he can dunk uncontested, unmolested around the rim. He could probably do that. But he doesn't get a lot of opportunities, right? He's not a guy who's going to cram on somebody in traffic. It has to be set up just right for Luke Kennard to rise up and dunk. And, he had his moment. But he's been having moments. He's had a great few weeks. It's almost like, they trying to, when they tried and failed to trade him, that lit a fire or something. But he's played, I don't know if it's his best basketball since he's been a Grizzly, because he was red hot after the trade 2 years ago for a while. But it's the best sustained basketball he's played in a while. And it hasn't just been the shooting. He's been aggressive with the ball as a ball handler and a passer. And I feel like those things may be related. That when he has the ball more and he's not just a spot up catch and shoot guy, maybe that gets you in a better flow and you can be a little bit more aggressive about pulling the trigger doing that.
I think there's a few things here. You know, maybe it was lighting a fire after the trade.
I was half joking about that, but it is something that's happened.
I also think that when you are in that role in the NBA and you're a sharpshooter and you are the caliber of shooter that Luke Kennard is, the way you are perceived almost entirely depends on whether or not, well, it's not even that, but like the way the conversation around you has everything to do with whether or not those shots go in. And for a little bit, those shots weren't always going in for Luke Kennard. But again, you look up and like you look at the top 3-point shooters by percentage this season, and there's Luke Kennard, like right there inside the top 5. It's like, you know, water always finds its level here. Right. And that's what I feel like has kind of happened here with Luke. It's like you were kind of just waiting for it to become a thing that, you know, the shots are going in and he's meaningful on the team again. And we've reached that point. And he has played really well recently. But I do think it is a little bit of a change that he has the ball in his hands more so. And that's just been, and it's been Desmond Bane too. Like they're not using a true backup point guard in the way that they did early in the season. They're just kind of rolling with those
Pippen
guys.
has still been playing, but he's been playing. And they changed up the rotation a little bit last night against the Hornets. In the MLK game, when Pippen played, he played with Ja. Last night he did play with Kennard and Bane, but even in those lineups, he wasn't really on the ball. They were using him more as a off-ball player on offense and a defensive player. And so it really feels like, and we got half a season to go, but it feels like they're sort of trending towards, you know, playoff basketball not having to have a true point guard on the floor when Ja's not playing.
Okay, one more player thing. We're going to name, I failed to mention at the top, we are going to name our all-star picks because I know there's a lot of questions about whether or not Jaren's going to make it. And the starters are being announced tonight as we record this on TNT. We don't expect Jaren's going to be a starter based on the fan vote. But the reserves will be announced a week from tonight. So there's still time for the debate on Jaren Jackson Jr. to continue as an all-star. So we will get into that. But I wanted to talk about one more player and then zoom out real quick before we get to all that stuff. G.G. Jackson makes his return. He does it on MLK Day against the Wolves. Taylor Jenkins admitted he didn't necessarily have plans to play G.G. early in that game, but the team started out sluggish and he was looking for a spark, so he put him in the game. Nothing spectacular came of it. Then G.G. plays again limited minutes against Charlotte. Again, a pretty modest level of production, but looked, I think, a little bit more like G.G. Jackson in the second game. G.G. talked yesterday morning before the game against Charlotte, made it very clear he has a chip on his shoulder coming into this second season. He said, they forgot about me. I asked who forgot about him, and he said a lot of people. So this to me feels a little bit like he's one of those athletes searching for the slight, searching for the motivation. And he's going to create it, even if it's necessarily not there, because, the fans were chanting for him to get in the game against Minnesota. So I think everybody's excited and has not forgotten about G.G. Jackson in Memphis. Maybe he's talking more national, but what have you just made of what he's done in these first two games and what the future could look like for him as the rest of the season unfolds?
What I've mostly made of it is I think a lot of people are making too much of G.G. Jackson right now. Right now. He's barely 20 years old. Turned 20 years old like 3 weeks ago or something. Has never played meaningful NBA basketball until now because last season was a lost season. Was a second-round pick. Has talented athletic and scoring abilities, but has a ways to go in terms of the context of team basketball at a playoff level. And I think the team has a patient approach to him that I think fans would be well suited to adopt. I think the range of possible is wide with him now and going forward. And so in theory, could I see him just working his way into this team's rotation and being a double-digit scorer off the bench by the end of the season? Yeah, I can see that. That's not my expectation. I think it is as likely, if not more likely, that he's on the outside looking in for the rest of this season. And then, maybe you have a different role going into next season. But this team is so deep and we're halfway through the season and he's so young, because he is such a magnetic personality and people have instilled so much in him. I think there's a level of expectation that's sort of out of whack with what the reality of his situation actually is with this team at this moment.
Yeah, no, I would not discourage people from being excited about Gigi Jackson.
Oh, no.
I think you absolutely should be excited about Gigi Jackson because what he's shown is that he can produce at the NBA level. He said, he got asked flat, what do you think you bring to this team? And he said, more points. Like, that's what he said. And I think that is true, but there's more to the game than that. And it's interesting because when we look at some of these other players that are on the verge of returning, it feels like Vince is probably coming the soonest here. Right. And then, Marcus potentially behind him. Like those players, because they're physical wing defenders, and that's something that Memphis clearly could use some help with. We saw Amen Thompson and what he's done against Memphis. Like they have a more clear path because the team has a more clear need for what they bring. And so to me, that's not Gigi's fault. It's just like his talents are different than those guys. His niche is being able to put the ball in the basket.
His age is different from those guys.
And his age is different from those guys.
Right.
So, but it's just like their Grizzlies are going to have a very difficult time figuring out who's going to play and who is not going to play as they go through the rest of the season if they do get healthy.
I think for this season alone and for these playoffs alone, I think the Marcus Smart and the Vince Williams questions are much more significant questions for the Grizzlies than the Gigi Jackson question. For this season, not long term, but for this season.
Yeah. Well, again, I still think you should be excited about Gigi Jackson. I still think there's a good chance he could be in the playoff rotation when they get to that, if he just finds that groove again and shows that he's just got that supreme level of talent. Like, certainly capable.
No, he could, but this expectation that I think some people have had of he was going to step right into a significant role in the team immediately, coming off this injury at 20 years old when he's barely played, it's just not a realistic expectation.
Let's zoom out real quick before we take a break. We talked a lot about that 11-game stretch, and they're now past it because they played Charlotte and they won. But the 11-game stretch against teams in the West that are going to be competing for play-in and playoff spots. Played 6 of those games without Ja. They played 7 of those games on the road. Played 2 back-to-backs over that stretch. They finished 6-5. To me, that was pretty good given the situation that they were facing. I think there was some distress at points along the road. But to come out of that, winning your last 3, 2 against San Antonio, 1 against Minnesota, or I guess the one right before San Antonio was in Minnesota too. So they, last 4.
Well, they had the Houston game.
Oh, the Houston game.
In the middle of that.
That's right. That's right. To come out of that, at 6-5, do you think do you think your perception of where this team is as a contender, and I know you wrote a little bit about this, has changed at all based on those last 11 games?
No, I don't think my perception of that has changed, but I do think they have sort of solidified themselves a little bit. If you were worried that the early season stuff was a mirage created by a soft schedule, I think they have answered those questions fairly well. 6-5 in that stretch. The only loss they've had by double digits, the last time they lost a game by double digits was at OKC at the start of that stretch on December 29th. So even when they lose, these are like nip and tuck games, right? Nip and tuck, both Houston games, or end up being 2-point games at the end. It's a 5-point loss at Sacramento. The game they lost at Golden State, Ja, I think out for some of these, was a single-digit game. So they have been very competitive on the road against playoff caliber teams. And do I think 6-5 in that stretch is some rousing success? No. But do I think it's a good performance relative to the schedule, relative to your injury situation? I think it confirms that they are OKC's running off with the West, and there's a few teams that are right behind them, and Grizzlies are not only one of those teams in the standings, they are one of those teams.
I was asked on the radio today if I think that this upcoming Rockets game has like more meaning to it than it otherwise would have. And I answered and said, I don't necessarily think so. Like, the tiebreaker is already decided between those two teams. You know, psychologically, it might have a little bit of meaning to the fans, but I think the Grizzlies have proven at this point that they're plenty capable of being in that tier of teams, you know, that tier right below, you know, OKC and Boston and Cleveland at this point. And like, beating the Rockets in the last matchup doesn't necessarily, I don't think they have to do that to prove anything, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if they have to do that. I mean, two things there. In terms of the standing situation, I mean, all the wins are going to matter a lot no matter who you're playing, because you look over your shoulder, you got Denver charging hard. I think the difference between 3 and 2 is less meaningful than the difference between 3 and 4. Because if you drop down to 4, you're looking at, if you get past the first round, you got OKC in the second. So I would really be wanting to stay in the 2-3 if I'm the Grizzlies, and I'd rather be 2 than 3, but I don't know if the difference is profound between 2 and 3 in terms of what it means for the playoffs. But I think that's going to be a high wattage game because like those teams are really good and they kind of don't like each other right now. And it's going to be on national TV. And I don't think it's some must win, like you send yourself into a panic spiral if you lose the game. But I think the game should be taken very seriously. That's what's going to make it more fun.
I think it will be taken seriously.
Oh, I know the Grizzlies will be taking it seriously.
But again, yeah, I don't think it's like some sort of must win. I just don't view it as that. But I do think you're right on that. And the other reason you want to stay in that 2-3 is because of the teams that you potentially would play against in the first round. Like, you want to see Minnesota, I think, or Sacramento. Like, those matchups would be, you'd feel pretty confident going into if you were a Grizzlies fan. The one that makes me nervous is the LA teams, like the two, I should say. Like, the big physical bigs have given them problems this year. And at this stage, I just got done saying this, I'm thinking about Jaren matchups more than I'm thinking about anything else as it relates to
I think it's hard to scope out first round matchups at this point in the season because the standings are so tight. But I know that if you get into the 4-5 game and you win that series, you're playing OKC in the second round.
Right.
Like that I know. And so I that's why the 2-3 is where I would really be angling to try to stay to avoid, you got to win the first round, which is not guaranteed at all, but to try to avoid OKC in the second round.
Okay. Well, as we said, there's going to be all-star starters announced tonight on TNT. We will see who they are. But first, Chris and I are going to predict them. So hopefully you're listening to this.
Oh, no, we're not predicting. We're doing our own teams.
Right. We're saying who should be.
Yes.
Who should be
right.
all-stars. I got to be honest, though. I did add a little dose of realism into mine.
Okay.
Not just stats. So let's name some teams, but first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
All right, Chris, I want to start in the East and I want to save the West because obviously a big part of this discussion will be Jaren Jackson Jr. and where he fits into this conversation. So let's start in the East. Why don't you give me your East starters and I will then give you my East starters and we can go by position. So give me your East starting guards.
My East starting guards. To me, there's a 3-man group, but you got to pick 2. And my choices are Jalen Brunson and by a hair, Darius Garland.
Okay. I think we probably had the same 3-person group. I had a 3-person grouping of Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, and Darius Garland.
Yep.
And I chose Donovan Mitchell, but put in notes, maybe Darius Garland. I think Darius Garland statistically is a little bit better, which is probably why you put him there. I think Donovan Mitchell's a little bit more irreplaceable to the best team in the East, and so I think you can go either way.
I think it's my instinct was Mitchell until I took a closer look at it, but it's an extremely close call. I went Garland because they're both kind of combos, but Garland is more the point guard. Their scoring is pretty much equal, even though Garland, I think, is a little bit more of the playmaking load. And Garland's been a little bit more efficient scorer this season, but it's kind of coin flip territory for me. And I don't know if they both will be on the team. They both should be. Mitchell, I think, will start, get into the prediction game. I think, well, maybe not. He may not start because of the LaMelo Ball thing. I think Mitchell will be on the All-Star team. I don't know if Garland will, but I think he should be.
Yeah, I think they definitely should be. I think Donovan Mitchell absolutely will make an All-Star team no matter what. He's pretty much a lock. Yeah. I did not dive into the stats, I'm sure, the way that you did, but Donovan Mitchell is, to me, the most irreplaceable player on the team, right? Like, he is the engine that makes that team go, in a way. And so I just gave him the nod over Darius Garland. And then Brunson, obviously is on one of the better teams in the East as well, and, means a ton to his team. It's interesting. I'll go ahead and name my forwards now.
All right.
Because I also had Karl Anthony Towns as a starter, and I felt a little uncomfy with two Knicks as starters. But I had Karl Anthony Towns, Jason Tatum, Giannis. Tatum and Giannis, to me, were no-brainers. They're going to be starters, and they deserve there. The other one I considered was Evan Mobley, and it felt more right to have two Cavs than to have two Knicks, yet I went with two Knicks.
All right, so this is very similar to the guard situation. I have Tatum and Giannis. Again, those are locks. And then to me, it was a coin flip call with Mobley and Towns. I went Mobley. That's my starter, and Towns off the bench. But so we have a slightly different starting five, but our core seven, the five starters and the top guard reserve, top front court reserve, are the same seven players we have. Just a slight difference in the starting lineups. I bet there'll be some more difference with the final five, though.
There was no doubt on Giannis and Tatum for you, correct? You did not even consider.
Probably the two best players in the conference.
In the end, the last spot came down to Mobley and Cat. Yeah. Okay.
Sort of an offense-defense choice there a little bit.
East reserves. Why don't you give me your two guard East reserves?
So Mitchell is one of them, as we've talked about. And then that fourth guard, there's a lot of guys you can choose from. My fourth guard is Cade Cunningham, who has led the Detroit Pistons to one of the most surprising seasons in the league this year. That is not a star-laden team. And in fact, one of their second-best young player is now hurt. But he's sort of had a breakout. 25 points, 7 boards, 9 assists, sort of being like junior Luka over there.
Yeah. I had Garland, obviously. And I also had Cade Cunningham as and I even put it down. I think he's a lock. Like, I think the coaches are absolutely going to put him in. Detroit's over 500. They're have a chance to potentially be in a playoff race in the East. And nobody really saw that coming except for maybe you, Chris, who picked them in the preseason to be a lot better.
I picked them to double their win total, which would have taken them to the win total. They're close to already had it. Close to it, right? And so I did not think they'd be this good. No.
So I think the way that he has really carried that team, that the coaches are absolutely going to acknowledge him, and he will be there. We'll continue to alternate. I'll go my forwards here. I had Mobley, who I did not include as a starter. I had Jaylen Brown, and then I had to have another one. And so I went with Siakam because the Pacers, it felt like, maybe should have a representative. And, he's been probably the best player on their team this year. So I went with him, and I didn't feel great about it, but those were the forwards.
Yeah, I mean, so I had Towns instead of Mobley. We already talked about that. I also have Jaylen Brown. That's one of my second three front court players. And then, just sort of skipping ahead slightly, it's a slight distinction between because you have two wild cards on the team. Right. And one of my wild cards is a front court player. I have Siakam as one of my wild cards, so I do have him on my team. I have him slotted as a wild card, not as one of the three reserve front court. The other front court guy I have, I'm going 4 Cavs on the All-Star team. I've got Jared Allen. Yeah.
Yeah, I considered Jared Allen here, and I considered Franz Wagner. And then I think the other forward would be Jalen Johnson. That's getting a little bit of buzz. But none of those players that I just mentioned.
I really wish like we could just smush Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero together, who have sort of alternated being available, and give them one all-star spot. Because I do think both of those guys have been among the 12 best players in the East this year when they played. They just haven't played enough.
For a while, the Magic were just still rolling even without their guys. They've kind of come back down to
So I definitely considered Franz Wagner for that last spot, but I gave it to Siakam just because there's a 20-game difference in playing time.
This is where in my wild card talk, I said there will be some realism in here. The fact that LaMelo Ball is leading the East in votes suggests to me that he's probably going to make the team one way or another. And I know maybe this is cheating since we said deserving, and I don't think he's going to be on your list, but I did put him in just because I think you have to, at some point, if we were to say who should be in the All-Star game, you also consider who the fans want to see.
Right.
And he is wildly popular among young fans. I'm not a huge fan, but
I say screw the fans. He is not on my All-Star game.
I know. I'm not a huge LaMelo guy, but I know there are a lot of LaMelo people out there, and so I put him on the list. And then the other one, you could have gone a number of different ways. Like Lillard, I think had somewhat of a chance. Maxey, I guess, although the Sixers season's been a disaster.
Right.
Jared Allen, Jalen Johnson, as I mentioned, but I went with Trae Young. He's leading the NBA in assists. I think, it's not even particularly close. And so I think he would be deserving if he made it.
So it's always a close call when you get to the wild card spots. Like I said, I had Pascal Siakam for one. I really sort of chose ultimately among 4 or 5 guys. It was Pascal Siakam and a bunch of guards. And I considered Trae Young very, very closely. I considered Tyrese Halliburton, Zach LaVine. Thought long and hard about Derek White, but the Celtics sort of fall off lately. I didn't want to give them 3. I ended up going Lillard for my other wild card spot. He's not a very good defender. He's never been, but he's been terrific on offense yet again. And that Bucks team has floated back up to a top 4 team in the East. And so I gave him the nod just slightly over Halliburton, who had a bad start, and then Trae Young, who I do think he's probably been a better team basketball player this year than ever before, but his scoring efficiency is pretty shaky. But to me, that's a close call among those guys.
Yeah, Lillard was my first one out there, but I'm glad that as we said, you were correct on your Pistons prediction. The Bucks are not entirely letting me down after I put them, I think, to finish second in the East this year.
So we have a difference of 2 players in our starting lineup and then 2 players on the total team, where I have Jarrett Allen and Damian Lillard. You have Trae Young and LaMelo Ball.
Right. Okay. On to the West. And I think this is going to work out nicely because I think Jaren's probably going to end up on the back end, and we can talk about him and compare him to some of the other players that have a chance to get in. But start by giving me your West starting backcourt. I think this is going to end up being pretty simple.
Well, I think one of the spots is a complete lock, obviously, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Of all locks.
The lock of all locks, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I do think there's room for discussion for the second guard spot among 2, maybe 3, but probably 2 guys. And I went with Steph Curry. To me, it was a Steph Curry, Anthony Edwards choice for me for that spot. I think you could go either way. I went Curry. I just think the Minnesota situation has been so messy, and I think Edwards has contributed to some of the messiness. I think the Golden State issues have nothing to do with Steph Curry. He's still awesome, and just the team has sort of fallen apart around him. I think he's still great.
Yeah, I went with Curry and SGA as well. Yes, it was the only one I really considered was Anthony Edwards there. It'll be I'm interested to see what the rest of your West reserve guards look like because it is a little thin this year.
It's a mess because of some of the missed games. Yeah.
My West starting forwards, I had Jokic, another absolute lock in that spot. I have Victor Wembanyama, because I think he is the most impactful defensive player in the league, pretty much, trending towards winning Defensive Player of the Year. And there's, again, consider who the fans want to see. I put LeBron James in the starters because he is wildly the most popular basketball player in the world. And
he will probably be an all-star starter. He is not my all-star starter. If I get to pick my own team, I'm not picking him to be a starter on the team. I want a guy who at least tries to play defense. He has stopped playing defense, LeBron James, this season. I agree on Jokic and Wemby. I have both of those guys as all-star on my starters. And I've got Jaren Jackson Jr.
Oh, wow.
I don't think that's a homer pick. I'll keep it simple with Jaren. Jaren is the leading scorer on the 5th-ranked offense in the NBA. And at the exact same time, he is by far the best defensive player on the 6th-ranked defense in the NBA. And while he is not the best player in the league, because there's 2 other guys starting on the West, Nikola Jokic and SGA, who are that, there's no other player in the league who is both the leading scorer and the top defender on team units having that much success. Nobody in the league. And I think what will hurt Jaren is glancing at counting stats, game averages, because he doesn't pile up a lot of rebounds and the Grizzlies don't play their guys heavy minutes. But I think total impact, both ends of the floor, contributing to team success, I think he should be starting the All-Star game.
Well, I can certainly get behind the reasoning there, and Jaren is on my All-Star team, and I think it would be pretty tragic if he didn't make the All-Star team, given what he has meant to one of the best teams and most competitive teams in the West, and the fact that everybody around the Grizzlies, including the other star players, by the way, are saying we wouldn't even be close to where we are right now if it weren't for him.
What's the other part of it? We talk about missed games and all this. He's played 41 straight. He missed the first 2 games of the season with that hamstring thing. Has played every game since then.
I know. And he just means so much to this team. And I also think, the fact that his game has continued to grow and develop, and like he's getting even better and more efficient in ways that he hasn't been in the past. Like, the numbers can be similar to when he was previously an all-star 2 seasons ago. The game is not the same if you actually watch Grizzlies games night in and night out. And so I feel like he is super deserving of a spot. And I didn't have him.
What we've learned here is that Drew hates Jaren. Should we go on to our
okay,
our
don't
reserves?
do that to me. Don't do that to me. Sure. Number 1 for me, I'm surging ahead. Jaren Jackson Jr.
No, backcourt reserves.
Okay, backcourt reserves.
We've already both said Anthony Edwards is one of those spots.
Yes, Anthony Edwards is one of the spots. The other spot I had, I know he'll get replaced, but he's super, super, super dominant, is Luka. Like, I know he hasn't played a ton of games, but he's that good that I think he probably deserves it. If you're not going to do that and you're just going to replace him, I considered Norm Powell. I considered Kyrie. I consider Booker. I would probably go with Kyrie.
I respect the Luka pick because Luka's like a top 6 player in the world.
Like, let's be honest.
And it ended up not being my pick, but maybe I sort of wish maybe I had done that. I respect that because Luke, at some level, the difference in quality is such that I don't want to lean too much into the games played if it's truly like an MVP level kind of player. But it's not just that he's only played 22. It's that I don't know when he's coming back. So I did not put him in that spot. The idea of like put him in that spot and then replace him if he can't play, I actually think that's a good call. But that's not what I have on my thing. I actually have his teammate Kyrie Irving. I think the best guards in the league in the West still left were Luka and Ja. But the missed games just kept me out of that. And I went with Kyrie for the 4th guard spot. But I would really rather have Luka or Ja in that spot.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't mention it. I also did consider Ja. It's right here on my list. It's hard, obviously. Like, all of those guards are right there together in the same grouping, and Ja is, passing wise, is having one of his best seasons, but he hasn't been able to stay.
Kyrie's had a real bounce back. 24 points a game, like great scoring efficiency. He's really contributed to winning. It's been a great fit in Dallas, and with Luka missing all the games, of course they've been losing, with Luka out. So I don't feel Irving was my pick and I'll stick with it, but I don't feel great about it. I almost like your pick better.
Okay, forwards. Jaren Jackson Jr. I have him here for all the reasons we just explained. Is super deserving to make the All-Star game, and again, despite Chris saying that I hate him, Which, by the way, I'll say this now. I think that I'm going to have some really great stuff on Jaren coming soon, and that you should be sure to check out the Daily Memphian's website, particularly if he gets selected as an all-star. So I really do hope that ends up working out. But yeah, I have Jaren here. I have Anthony Davis as another one of the West Reserve forwards. And then it's tough. I didn't know exactly where to go. I knew I was going to have more forwards as wild card spots, but I guess for this exercise, I'll say Jalen Williams. I think that the Thunder are deserving of having 2 all-stars in the game based on the way that they've played.
So I had Jaren as one of my starters. So reserves, I also have Anthony Davis and Jalen Williams. And my third front court reserve, not before we get to the wild card, was Kevin Durant, who has missed some games, but has just been as awesome as ever pretty much when he plays. He hasn't missed a ton of games. He's over 30 on the season, and I think he's been by far the best player on that shaky Phoenix team. And I got KD.
Well, it's interesting that you put him in because I also put him in as one of the wild card spots. Again, he is playing great. He is a player that the fans want to see. He engages on social media like he's got a massive following, and he's also very good. So I think that he was deserving. The other one I had was Şengün. And it's tough because Sabonis is somebody's got to get left off this list that's having a massive year. And to me, the same way that we rewarded Cade Cunningham for, surprising, and the statistics may be better for Cade, but he is also a guard, so it's a little different. But the same way that we are putting guys in the All-Star game for helping their teams be surprising, I think we can do the same here. And I put Şengün in. It was super close between him and Sabonis for the last wild card spot.
So with my wild card spots, so I sort of separated the front court, back court at first, and then you got to choose 2 ultimately in terms of contenders. And in the front court, I give Şengün and LeBron, who I haven't had on the team yet, he's still open for me. I give Şengün and LeBron the edge over Sabonis and a guy who I think has been really good is Ivica. I can never get his name right. Ivica Zubac for the Clippers. So my front court contenders were Şengün and LeBron. In the West, I think. De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker are putting up really good numbers. They played basically all the games. But I just think Luka and Ja are just better. They are better players and they contribute more to winning. And it's a real question of the better player versus the player who plays more. I favor Luka and Ja over Fox and Booker and then some other guards you can name, Norman Powell and others. So my guard candidates are Luka and Ja, who I think are the best players to put on to round out the team, but have missed tons of games. Versus Şengün and LeBron, who I think are not actually as good this season, but have played all the games. And I ended up going with Şengün and LeBron, but reluctantly.
Yeah. I do think Şengün should make the team. I think the Rockets should have a representative. But, I think Ja has a real case.
Well, here's the thing. We'll see because he tends to miss a lot of games. But if he just keeps playing, his game total is going to keep rising between now and the All-Star game, right? I got it at 25 because I did this before yesterday, but now it's at 26, right?
Yeah,
and
then
he plays both games this weekend. It's up to 28. It'll keep growing.
But that's the max. Then the selection is going to be taking place.
Yeah.
So, I do think he has a real case. And you want to just find a way to squeeze him in because he's so exciting. And
yeah.
If he's not, Ja would have to, you know what he needs to do? He needs to publicly come out. Ja needs to publicly come out and say, I will dunk again if I'm in the All-Star game. I'll make an exception for the All-Star game.
Even if he's on my team.
I'll dunk in the All-Star game. I'm not going to do the no dunking rule if I play in the All-Star game.
I'll suspend the no dunking rule for the All-Star game. Right.
Yeah, the votes would skyrocket, I think, in that scenario. But you want to find a way to push him in because the passing is the best it's been.
Here's another part of it, though. I didn't have LeBron as a starter. Neither of us had Durant as a starter. Those guys are probably both going to be starters on the All-Star team. I just think it's going to be tough for Ja the way that's going to be. maybe that there do have to be 4 guards. So I could see putting Ja, if Luka can't play, I could see putting Ja on the team over Kyrie. That's not the way I have it, but it was a close call for me. I think Ja's better.
Well, yeah, I think that's, I guess, part of the reason why you put Luka in the vote.
Yeah.
And, the coaches are going to decide. So if the Grizzlies are going to, try to play the unbiased card, maybe put the guy in the game that isn't going to play, and maybe the replacement ends up being Ja.
Right.
It might be a pretty good strategy if you're trying to vouch for your guys. I do think that, again, Ja is obviously one of the best talents in the league, but there's just if he had played, how many more games do you think he would need to play for this to almost be close to a no-brainer? Because if he was healthy, I think that this would
he's missed
be a lot
18.
less close.
He played 6 or 7 more. I think the way the Grizzlies have played, I think he would be very firmly like a likely All-Star.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate the way that the injuries have shaken out this season. All right, well, I guess we have no real serious gripes with each other's list. The LeBron thing was...
Yeah, well, yeah, I hit him as my 12th man.
Listen, I'm not even a LeBron guy.
Right.
I've never been a LeBron guy. But I just...
Technically speaking, our only difference was you had Luka and I had Kyrie, and I've already said I think you're probably right on that call.
Yeah. I mean, again... Maybe I should have swapped out LeBron for somebody else, but I was trying to take into consideration that the fan vote should matter to some degree.
Come on.
It shouldn't matter as much as it does.
He's LeBron James. He's averaging 24 points, 7 boards, 9 assists. The team is top 6 in the West. He does not play defense. The Lakers, as 6th in the West, have lost LeBron James minutes this season. They've been outscored with LeBron James on the floor. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, but no. Yes, he will be an All-Star, and it's fine.
All right, well, that will do it for us this week. We will be back next week talking, I'm sure, about the All-Star selections and everything else. And we got the trade deadline coming up, Chris, so it may be our trade deadline special next week. We'll just have to wait and see. But until next time, make sure you go check out all of the other Daily Memphian podcasts. Go read all of our stuff over at the website. But for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.